The mind is never neutral. Your mind is always doing something, even when you think you're resting. It's forming habits, replaying thoughts, shaping reactions. Most people don't notice this. They assume their mind is just there. But the mind is never neutral. It is either being trained or it is training you. If you don't decide what your mind focuses on, it will decide for you. If you don't choose how you respond, your impulses will. This is how people become trapped without bars. Not by force, but by patterns they never questioned. You don't need to be weak to be controlled by your mind. You just need to be unaware. This audiobook is not about fighting yourself. It's about understanding how your inner world actually works. Because once you see the patterns clearly, you can change them calmly. You don't need to dominate your mind. You need to lead it. Train the mind, or you will spend your life serving it. Let's begin. Chapter 1. You are not your thoughts, but you are serving them. Most people believe they are in control of their lives. They believe their choices are conscious. They believe their decisions are intentional. They believe their struggles are caused by circumstances. But if you slow down long enough to observe honestly, you'll notice something uncomfortable. Most of your life is not directed by choice. It is directed by habit. And those habits are driven by thoughts you never trained. This chapter is not here to scare you. It is here to wake you up gently. Because the most dangerous thing about an untrained mind is not chaos, it's normalcy. The quiet authority of thoughts. Thoughts don't knock before entering your mind. They don't ask for permission. They don't announce their intentions. They arrive, and you respond. A thought says, "You're tired. This can wait. It doesn't matter. You'll do it tomorrow. What's the point?" And without realizing it, you obey. Not because the thought is true, but because it was unquestioned. This is how people slowly lose control of their lives. Not through bad decisions, but through unexamined ones. Reaction feels like choice, but it isn't. Here's something rarely explained. Reaction feels almost identical to choice. Both involve action. Both involve movement. Both involve a sense of decision. But reaction is automatic. Choice is intentional. Reaction is the mind on autopilot. Choice is the mind awake. Most people are reacting all day long to emotions, to memories, to pressure, to fear, and calling it how I am. But how you are is not who you are. It's who you've practiced being. The brain learns what you repeat. Your brain is not moral. It is not wise. It is not protective. It is efficient. It strengthens whatever you repeat. If you repeat avoidance, your brain learns avoidance. If you repeat distraction, your brain learns distraction. If you repeat overthinking, your brain learns anxiety. If you repeat self-criticism, your brain learns shame. Not because these things are good, but because they are familiar. This is why people say, "I don't know why I keep doing this." The answer is simple and uncomfortable. Because your mind was trained, just not by you. Serving the mind without knowing it. To serve the mind means acting on every impulse, believing every thought, letting emotion decide direction, letting comfort outrank clarity. Most people don't realize they are serving their thoughts, because service doesn't feel like slavery. It feels like, this is just how I feel. This is just who I am. I can't help it. That's my personality. But personality is not fixed. It is conditioned. And conditioning can be changed. The myth of self-control. People often think training the mind means becoming rigid, harsh, or emotionless. That's not training. That's suppression. Training the mind is not about fighting thoughts. It's about reducing their authority. A trained mind still feels emotions. It still experiences fear. It still has intrusive thoughts. The difference? Those thoughts are no longer in charge. Awareness is the first break in the chain. Before any change happens, one thing must occur. You must notice. Not judge. Not fix. Not force. Just notice. Notice how often a thought tells you what to do, and you comply. Notice how moods dictate your discipline. Notice how discomfort pushes you into distraction. Notice how silence makes you restless. This noticing is not weakness. It is the beginning of command. You cannot train what you refuse to observe. Why untrained thoughts feel so personal? Thoughts sound like your voice. They use your language. They reference your memories. They know your fears. So it feels personal when a thought says, "You're not enough." But the thought is not you. It is a mental pattern, repeated often enough to feel true. The mind does not distinguish between truth and repetition. Only attention does. Comfort is the mind's favorite tool. Untrained minds prioritize comfort above all else. Comfort avoids effort. Comfort avoids risk. Comfort avoids silence. Comfort avoids responsibility. And comfort is patient. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't shout. It whispers. Later. Later is how people stay stuck for years. The cost of mental laziness. Mental laziness does not look like doing nothing. It looks like endless scrolling, constant noise, avoiding stillness, overconsumption without reflection, staying busy to avoid awareness. This is why people feel exhausted without doing meaningful work. The mind is busy, but not directed. Training begins with one question. Not, "How do I fix my life?" but, "Who is deciding right now?" Is it fear? Is it habit? Is it emotion? Or is it choice? This question alone begins to shift power. Why this matters more than motivation. Motivation fades. Emotion fluctuates. Energy changes. But a trained mind does not rely on feeling ready. It relies on clarity. Clarity outlasts excitement. Clarity survives boredom. Clarity holds when motivation disappears. This is why discipline, awareness, and mental training are not restrictive. They are freeing. You are always serving something. Every day, you are serving either your untrained mind or your conscious direction. There is no neutral. If you don't decide, your habits will. If you don't lead, your impulses will. If you don't train the mind, it will train you. This is not about becoming perfect. You will still fail. You will still slip. You will still have days where the mind wins. Training does not mean domination. It means regaining command faster. It means noticing earlier, recovering sooner, choosing again. A quiet truth. You don't need more information. You don't need more motivation. You don't need to become someone else. You need to stop serving thoughts that were never meant to lead. Where this book is taking you. This audiobook will not overwhelm you. It will not rush you. It will not demand perfection. It will teach you how to observe without panic, act without emotion ruling, think without spiraling, choose without force. Slowly, clearly, honestly. Right now, as you're listening, thoughts may already be responding. Some agreeing, some resisting, some distracted. Notice that. That noticing is the first sign you are no longer asleep. And from here on, we will build something simple, but powerful. Not control. Command. Chapter 2. How the Mind Learns Bad Habits Quietly. Nothing went wrong, it was just repeated. Most people think something went wrong with them. That at some point, they broke. That life damaged them. That trauma rewired them beyond repair. But for most people, nothing went wrong. Something was simply repeated. And repetition teaches the mind faster than intention ever will. Your mind didn't become anxious overnight. It learned anxiety by repetition. Your mind didn't become avoidant suddenly. It learned avoidance by repetition. Your mind didn't wake up one day addicted to distraction. It learned distraction by repetition. And the most dangerous part? You were living your life while this training was happening. No warning. No announcement. No dramatic moment. Just small choices, stacked quietly. The brain is always learning, even when you're not trying. Your brain does not wait for permission to learn. It learns from whatever you do most often. It learns from what you repeat under pressure. It learns from how you respond to discomfort. It learns from what you reach for when things feel heavy. This is why two people can experience the same situation and walk away with completely different inner lives. One learned resilience. Another learned fear. Not because one was stronger, but because their responses were different. The mind doesn't care why you repeat something, only that you do. Why bad habits don't feel dangerous. Bad habits don't feel bad at first. They feel relieving. They feel comforting. They feel like rest. Scrolling doesn't feel like harm. Avoiding doesn't feel like sabotage. Overthinking doesn't feel like self-attack. It feels like trying to protect yourself. That's why the mind adopts these patterns so easily. They reduce discomfort in the short term. And the mind loves short-term relief. The quiet bargain the mind makes. Every bad habit begins with a bargain. A quiet one. I'll help you feel better now, if you let me decide. The mind offers relief. You give up direction. At first, the cost feels small. Later, it becomes your life. How avoidance becomes identity. Let's talk about avoidance. Not laziness. Not weakness. Avoidance. Avoidance starts as self-protection. Something feels overwhelming. So you step away. Your nervous system relaxes. The brain says, "Good choice." Next time discomfort appears, the brain remembers. It nudges you away faster. Eventually, you don't even notice the nudge. You just feel not in the mood. Or too tired. Or not ready. And over time, Avoidance stops being a behavior and starts feeling like who you are. Why the mind prefers familiar pain. Here's something uncomfortable but true. The mind prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar growth. Because familiar pain is predictable. Predictability feels safe to the nervous system. Growth is uncertain. Uncertainty feels threatening. So the mind chooses what it knows, even if it hurts. This is why people stay stuck in patterns they hate. Not because they enjoy suffering, but because suffering is familiar. Emotional patterns are learned too. You didn't choose how you react emotionally. You learned it. You learned how to shut down. You learned how to explode. You learned how to over-explain. You learned how to numb yourself. And once learned, emotions become automatic. They arrive before thought, before logic, before intention. That's why saying, "just be positive," never works. You can't think your way out of a reflex. You have to retrain it. Why willpower isn't enough. Most people try to change habits with force. They push. They shame themselves. They promise. They fail. And they assume something is wrong with them. But willpower was never the problem. You were trying to fight training. With motivation. Training always wins. The mind doesn't respond to words. It responds to patterns. You can tell yourself you want change. The mind doesn't care. You can tell yourself this matters. The mind doesn't care. You can promise yourself you'll do better. The mind doesn't care. The mind watches what you repeat. That's the lesson it keeps. This is why change feels so slow. Untraining takes time. Not because you're weak, but because repetition built the pattern. And repetition is how it loosens. No dramatic breakthrough. No overnight shift. Just quieter reactions. Shorter spirals. Faster recovery. That's progress. A gentle truth. You are not broken. You are trained. And training can be changed. Not with force. With awareness. With patience. With repetition, done on purpose this time. Where we go next. Now that you understand how the mind learned these patterns, the next step is learning how it keeps them alive. Because habits don't survive on effort. They survive on emotion. And in the next part, we'll talk about the emotional hooks that quietly keep people stuck. Emotion is the glue. If repetition teaches the mind, emotion is what locks the lesson in. The mind does not remember facts well. It remembers feelings. That's why you can forget advice, but never forget how something made you feel. Every habit you have is attached to an emotion. Relief, comfort, safety, control. Even destructive habits carry emotional rewards. Otherwise, they wouldn't survive. Why the mind chooses relief over growth. Growth feels uncertain. Relief feels immediate. When stress appears, the mind asks one question. How do we make this stop? Not, what builds the future? Not, what aligns with values? Just, what makes this feeling go away? That's why people reach for distractions. Phones, food, noise, avoidance. The mind learns. When discomfort appears, escape works. And once learned, escape becomes instinct. The emotional loop that keeps people stuck. Here is the loop most people live inside. Discomfort appears. Avoidance follows. Relief is felt. The behavior is reinforced. Later, guilt appears. Shame follows. Energy drops. Discomfort increases. And the cycle repeats. Not because people are weak, but because the mind was rewarded. Why shame makes habits stronger. Most people try to fix bad habits with shame. They criticize themselves. You should know better. Why are you like this? But shame is emotional fuel. And fuel strengthens patterns. When you shame yourself, the mind feels threatened. Threat increases the need for relief. Relief triggers the habit again. So shame doesn't stop the cycle. It feeds it. The mind confuses safety with familiarity. Your nervous system does not define safety correctly. It defines safety as familiar. That's why you can feel uncomfortable doing something healthy, and strangely calm doing something harmful. The mind says, "At least I know this." This is why people resist change, even when change is good. Unfamiliar feels dangerous. Familiar feels safe. Training the mind means slowly teaching it that growth is not a threat. Why emotional awareness changes everything. You cannot break a habit by attacking behavior alone. You must understand the emotion underneath it. Ask yourself, what feeling does this habit protect me from? Boredom, loneliness, fear, pressure? Until that question is answered honestly, the habit will keep returning. Stillness reveals the training. Most people avoid stillness, not because it's empty, but because it reveals what the mind has been carrying. Restlessness, unprocessed emotion, avoided thoughts. Stillness exposes training. That's why it feels uncomfortable. But discomfort is not danger. It's information. The first real shift. The first shift is not changing behavior. It's delaying reaction. When discomfort appears, pause. Not forever. Just long enough to notice. What am I feeling? What am I trying to escape? That pause weakens the habit. Because habits rely on speed. Why this takes patience. You are undoing years of emotional conditioning. That doesn't collapse overnight. Progress looks like less urgency, shorter spirals, faster awareness. Those small shifts mean training is happening, even when it doesn't feel dramatic. A grounding reminder. You are not fighting yourself. You are retraining something that learned without guidance. Compassion is not weakness here. It's strategy. Your mind learned quietly. It will unlearn quietly too. Not through force. Through awareness. Through repetition, this time with intention. In the next chapter, we'll talk about something most people avoid entirely. Emotional autopilot, and why feeling normal is often the biggest trap. Chapter 3: Emotional Autopilot and the Illusion of Choice. When life is happening, but you are not choosing. Most people believe they are choosing their lives. They wake up. They move through the day. They make decisions. And because there is movement, It feels like choice. But there is a difference between movement and direction. And most people are moving without directing anything. This is what emotional autopilot looks like. What emotional autopilot really is. Emotional autopilot is not numbness. It's not laziness. It's not ignorance. It is when emotions quietly decide for you. Before you even notice a decision is happening. You feel tired, so you stop. You feel anxious, so you avoid. You feel bored, so you distract. You feel overwhelmed, so you shut down. None of this feels dramatic. It feels reasonable. That's why it's dangerous. Why autopilot feels like just being human. Most people don't question emotional autopilot because everyone around them is doing the same thing. Reacting feels normal. Avoiding feels understandable. Giving in feels human. And in many ways, it is human. But human does not mean inevitable. It means trained. The illusion of choice. Here is the illusion. You think you chose to stop trying. You think you chose to quit. You think you chose comfort. But if you look closely, a feeling came first, and the action followed automatically. That's not choice. That's reaction. Choice only exists when there is a pause, and autopilot removes the pause. How emotions become authority. Emotions were never meant to lead your life. They were meant to inform it. But when the mind is untrained, emotion becomes authority. If I feel like it, I do it. If I don't feel like it, I don't. This sounds harmless. Until you realize something. Feelings are temporary. But the consequences of obeying them are not. Why motivation is a trap. Most people are waiting to feel motivated. They say, when I feel better, I'll start. When I feel confident, I'll act. When I feel ready, I'll commit. But motivation is an emotion. And emotions are unreliable leaders. If your life waits on motivation, it will wait forever. The cost of emotional decision-making. Every time emotion decides for you, something small is lost. Self-trust, consistency, direction. Over time, the loss compounds. And one day you wake up feeling behind, without knowing exactly how it happened. Why this feels so hard to notice. Emotional autopilot does not announce itself. It doesn't say, I am controlling your life. It whispers, it's fine. Rest today. You deserve this. And sometimes, it's right. That's what makes discernment hard. Not every emotion should be ignored. But none should rule unchecked. The subtle difference between rest and escape. Rest restores you. Escape avoids something. Rest leaves you clearer. Escape leaves you foggier. Emotional autopilot blurs the difference. It tells you all relief is rest. And that's how growth quietly stops. Why autopilot feels safe. Autopilot removes responsibility. It lets you say, I just didn't feel like it. That sentence sounds harmless. But repeated over time, it becomes a life philosophy. And that philosophy shrinks your future. The moment you can interrupt autopilot. You cannot stop emotions from arising. but you can stop them from deciding. That moment is small. It lasts seconds. It happens when you feel the urge, and don't immediately move. That pause is where choice lives. Not in willpower. In awareness. A simple practice, no force. When an emotion appears, ask, what does this emotion want me to do? Then ask, if I do that, where does it lead? That question alone weakens autopilot, because it restores direction. Why this is freedom? Freedom is not doing whatever you feel. That's obedience to emotion. Freedom is being able to feel something, and still choose deliberately. That ability changes everything. Not overnight, but steadily. Right now, you may be noticing how often emotions lead you. That noticing is progress. In the next part of this chapter, we'll explore how autopilot shapes identity, and why people begin to believe, this is just who I am. When reaction becomes identity. There is a moment when autopilot goes deeper. It stops influencing behavior and starts shaping identity. This is where people don't just act a certain way. They begin to believe they are that way. I'm just not disciplined. I'm an anxious person. I've always been like this. These sentences feel true, but they are not truths. They are descriptions of patterns. How patterns become personality. The mind wants consistency. So when a behavior repeats long enough, the mind labels it. And once labeled, it feels permanent. Avoidance becomes my nature. Overthinking becomes how my brain works. Emotional reactions become who I am. But personality is not fixed. It is reinforced. And reinforcement can be interrupted. Why this feels so personal? Thoughts don't feel external. They speak in your voice. They use your memories. They reference your past. So when a thought says, you can't handle this, it feels like self-knowledge. But it is not knowledge. It is a trained response, trying to preserve comfort. The emotional shortcut the mind takes. The mind prefers shortcuts. Thinking deeply costs energy. Reacting costs less. So the mind asks, what did we do last time? And repeats it. This is efficient, but not intelligent. Efficiency without awareness creates stagnation. Why people say, I didn't even think. You've heard it before. I didn't even think. That's not an excuse. It's an accurate description. Autopilot bypasses thinking. It moves straight from feeling to action. And the more often this happens, the weaker conscious choice becomes. The cost of living this way. Living on autopilot doesn't destroy your life quickly. It shrinks it slowly. Dreams get postponed. Goals become vague. Effort feels heavier. Time feels faster. And one day you look around and think, how did I get here? Not because you chose it, but because you never interrupted it. Why awareness feels uncomfortable at first. When awareness returns, so does responsibility. You can no longer say, I didn't notice. And that can feel heavy. But responsibility is not punishment. It is power returning. It means your life is back in your hands. The pause that changes everything. Autopilot depends on speed. It needs quick reactions, urgency, impulse. The moment you slow down, it weakens. A single pause is enough to break the pattern. Not forever. Just long enough to see. Choice is not loud. Choice doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel powerful. It feels quiet. Almost boring. Choice often feels like doing the obvious thing, without drama. That's why people miss it. Why this isn't about control. This is not about controlling emotions. Control creates tension. This is about command. Command is calm. Command listens, then decides. You don't silence emotions. You stop letting them vote. A simple truth. You are not weak because emotions influence you. You are human. But staying on autopilot is a choice once you become aware. Awareness removes innocence, but it gives freedom. Emotional autopilot is not your enemy. It is a system that learned without guidance. Now, guidance is returning. Slowly, gently, and deliberately. In the next chapter, we will talk about why comfort feels like safety. Chapter 4: Why comfort feels like safety, but isn't. Most people don't choose comfort because they are lazy. They choose it because their mind tells them it's safe. That distinction matters. If comfort were just about laziness, change would be easy. You'd push harder. You'd shame yourself less. You'd just do better. But comfort isn't chosen by weakness. It's chosen by fear. Quiet fear that doesn't announce itself. The mind learns early that discomfort feels dangerous. Not because it truly is, but because discomfort requires effort, uncertainty, and attention. And the untrained mind avoids all three. So it creates a shortcut. It says, stay where you are. Don't push. Don't question. This is fine. And because nothing bad happens immediately, that message feels like wisdom. But it isn't. It's sedation. Comfort is a feeling, not a signal. Comfort feels like safety because both calm the nervous system. But they are not the same thing. Safety protects you. Comfort soothes you. Safety allows growth. Comfort avoids friction. The mind doesn't know the difference, unless it's trained. So it treats anything uncomfortable as a threat. Speaking honestly, trying something new, thinking deeply, sitting in silence, facing uncertainty. All of these trigger mild discomfort. And the mind responds with avoidance. Not because they are harmful, but because they require effortful awareness. That's why comfort feels protective. It lowers mental demand. It turns off alertness. It gives the illusion that nothing is required of you right now. And the mind loves right now. Why the mind prefers comfort over truth. Truth takes energy. It requires you to notice what you're doing, question why you're doing it, interrupt patterns, choose differently. Comfort asks for none of that. Comfort says, later, tomorrow. It's not that serious. And because those thoughts reduce internal tension, the mind rewards them. Relief feels good. Relief feels safe. So the mind learns something dangerous. Avoidance works. Not forever, but for now. And for now is enough to repeat the pattern. The quiet bargain you don't realize you're making. Every time you choose comfort instead of attention, you make a trade. Not a dramatic one. A quiet one. You trade clarity for ease, direction for relief, growth for familiarity. And because the cost is delayed, the mind doesn't register the loss. Nothing explodes. Nothing collapses. Life keeps moving. That's why comfort is so effective. It doesn't destroy your life. It slowly shrinks it. Why discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is not danger. It's information. It tells you something needs attention. Something is unfamiliar. Something requires effort. But the untrained mind interprets discomfort as threat. So instead of asking, "What is this teaching me?" it asks, "How do I make this stop?" And the fastest way to make discomfort stop is comfort. Scroll, distract, avoid, delay. None of these solve anything. They just numb awareness. Comfort and the illusion of control. Here's the irony. Comfort makes you feel in control, but it quietly takes control away. When you only act when it feels easy, your emotions decide your behavior. When you only think when it feels comfortable, your habits decide your thinking. And slowly, without noticing, you stop leading your life. You start reacting to it. That's not freedom. That's obedience to mood. Why comfort grows stronger over time. Comfort isn't static. It adapts. What once felt like rest becomes avoidance. What once felt like patience becomes delay. What once felt like kindness becomes self-betrayal. And the mind doesn't warn you. It just adjusts the threshold. Soon, anything slightly uncomfortable feels too much. Effort feels heavy. Focus feels exhausting. Stillness feels awkward. Not because you're incapable, but because the mind hasn't been trained to stay present under mild pressure. Comfort is the mind's default, not its wisdom. Left alone, the mind does not optimize for growth. It optimizes for energy conservation. This is not a flaw. It's biology. But when biology runs unexamined, it becomes a cage. Comfort becomes the ruler. Ease becomes the standard. Discomfort becomes something to avoid at all costs. And that's how potential goes unused. Not wasted, just untouched. The subtle cost of staying comfortable. Comfort doesn't just affect what you do. It affects what you believe about yourself. You start to believe, "I'm not ready. I'm not disciplined. I'm not that kind of person." But those beliefs aren't truths. They are stories created to justify avoidance. Comfort doesn't say, "You can't." It says, "You don't have to." And that's far more convincing. When comfort replaces choice. Here's the danger point. When comfort becomes automatic, choice disappears. You don't decide, you default. You don't choose, you drift. And drifting feels peaceful, until you look up and realize you haven't moved. Why this chapter matters. This chapter is not telling you to live in discomfort. That would be reckless. It's teaching you to recognize false safety. To see when comfort is helping you recover versus keeping you asleep. Comfort has a place, but it is not a leader. If comfort decides your actions, your life will stay familiar, not meaningful. The shift begins with awareness. The moment you see comfort clearly, its power weakens. You begin to notice. When you're avoiding instead of resting. When you're soothing instead of thinking. When you're delaying instead of deciding. And that noticing doesn't require force. It requires honesty. A simple question that changes everything. Whenever you feel the pull toward comfort, ask, is this restoring me or avoiding something? The answer is usually obvious. And once it's obvious, you have a choice again. Not a dramatic one. A small one. But small choices repeated are how minds are trained. What comes next? Now that you understand why comfort feels safe, the next question is unavoidable. What happens when the mind stays comfortable for too long? Not emotionally. Cognitively. That's where we're going next. Because comfort doesn't just soften effort, it weakens thinking. And that cost is quiet, cumulative, and dangerous. Comfort explains why you stop pushing, but it doesn't explain what you lose by stopping. To understand that, we need to talk about what happens when the mind stops working for you. Chapter 5: The Cost of Mental Laziness. Mental laziness is not stupidity. It is not a lack of intelligence. Some of the smartest people live under it. Quietly. Mental laziness is what happens when the mind stops questioning itself. When thinking becomes automatic instead of intentional. It doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself. It feels like relief. Like rest. And that's why it's dangerous. What mental laziness actually is. Mental laziness is not doing nothing. It's doing the same thing without noticing. It's letting thoughts repeat without inspection. Letting reactions happen without choice. It's when the mind runs on default settings. Not because it's broken, but because it hasn't been trained. The untrained mind avoids effort. Not physical effort. Mental effort. Effortful thinking requires attention. And attention feels heavy when it's unused. So the mind takes shortcuts. It copies yesterday's thoughts. It reuses old beliefs. It reacts the same way again and again. And because nothing explodes immediately, it feels harmless. Why the mind avoids thinking deeply. Thinking deeply costs energy. And the mind is an energy-saving machine. It prefers patterns. Familiar stories. That's why you hear the same thoughts every day. I'm like this. I always mess this up. This is just how life is. Those thoughts are not truth. They are shortcuts. They save the mind from reevaluating reality. And reevaluation feels uncomfortable. So the mind chooses ease over accuracy. Comfort over clarity. That choice feels small. But it repeats. Mental laziness and the illusion of intelligence. You can be educated and mentally lazy. You can be talented and mentally lazy. Mental laziness is not about what you know. It's about how often you question what you know. A trained mind asks, is this true? Is this useful? Is this chosen? An untrained mind assumes. And assumptions feel safe. That's how people stay stuck while believing they understand themselves. They mistake familiarity for insight. But repeating a thought does not make it wise. It just makes it loud. How mental laziness shrinks your life. Mental laziness doesn't ruin your life suddenly. It narrows it slowly. You stop exploring new ideas. You stop questioning your reactions. You stop imagining alternatives. Not because they don't exist, but because thinking feels tiring. So your options shrink. Your behavior becomes predictable. And predictability feels safe. Until it becomes suffocating. This is how people feel trapped without being imprisoned. Their body is free. Their mind is not. Mental laziness and emotional control. Untrained thinking makes emotions louder. Because nothing interrupts them. If a thought says, "This is hopeless," you feel hopeless. If a thought says, "I can't handle this," your body tightens. Without examination, thoughts become commands. And emotions follow orders. This is not because emotions are weak. It's because thinking went offline. Mental laziness hands authority to impulse. And impulse is not wise. Why mental laziness feels normal. Most people live this way. That's the uncomfortable truth. When everyone around you reacts automatically, reaction feels normal. When everyone avoids discomfort, avoidance feels reasonable. So mental laziness hides in plain sight. It looks like life. But normal does not mean healthy. And common does not mean free. The link between mental laziness and lost freedom. Freedom requires choice. Choice requires awareness. Awareness requires effort. And effort is exactly what mental laziness avoids. So the cost becomes clear. The lazier the thinking, the fewer the choices. The fewer the choices, the smaller the life. Not externally, internally. You begin to live inside reactions instead of decisions. And that feels like fate. But it isn't. It's neglect. How mental laziness trains the brain against you. Every time you avoid thinking, the brain learns avoidance. Every time you let a thought pass unchallenged, it gains authority. The brain adapts to what you practice. And neglect is a form of practice. Soon, effortful thinking feels foreign. Focus feels heavy. Not because you can't focus, but because you haven't trained it. The quiet regret mental laziness creates. Years later, people don't regret resting. They regret drifting. They regret not asking better questions. Not noticing earlier. Mental laziness delays self-awareness. And delayed awareness delays change. That delay compounds. Like interest, but in the wrong direction. Mental laziness is not a moral failure. This is important. Mental laziness is not something to shame yourself for. Shame shuts down thinking. And that makes the problem worse. Mental laziness is a training issue, not a character flaw. You were never taught how to work with your thoughts. So your mind did what minds do. It conserved energy. Understanding this removes blame. And blame never helped anyone think better. The first step out of mental laziness. You don't fix mental laziness by forcing productivity. That's another shortcut. You fix it by noticing your thoughts. Not fighting them. Asking simple questions. Is this true? Is this useful? Is this chosen? That questioning is effort. But it's light effort, not violence. And effort, practiced gently, becomes strength. Why this chapter matters. Comfort explained why you stop pushing. Mental laziness explains why thinking weakens. Together, they explain how freedom erodes quietly. Without drama. Without warning. But awareness reverses this. And awareness begins with attention. If mental laziness is the cost, attention is the currency you lost. And the good news is this. Attention can be trained. But first, you must understand its value. Chapter 6. Attention is the real currency. What you feed grows. There is something more powerful than motivation. More powerful than willpower. More powerful than intelligence. And most people give it away all day. Without realizing what it costs. That thing is attention. Your attention is not neutral. Whatever you give it to grows. Whatever you starve weakens. This is not philosophy. It's how the mind works. Why your life looks the way it does. Look honestly at your life. Not with judgment. With observation. The things that dominate your thoughts are the things you've been feeding. The fears that feel strongest are the fears you've rehearsed. The habits that feel automatic are the ones you've paid attention to. Your life is not random. It is trained by focus. Attention is training. Every time you dwell on a thought, you strengthen it. Every time you replay a memory, you reinforce its emotional charge. Every time you scroll, distract, avoid, you teach the mind what matters. The mind doesn't ask if something is helpful. It asks if it is attended to. Attention is instruction, even when you don't mean it to be. Why people feel out of control. Most people feel out of control because their attention is scattered, pulled in 10 directions. Split between fear, comparison, noise, and urgency. A scattered mind cannot command itself. It can only react. And reaction always follows the loudest signal, not the wisest one. The lie of multitasking. Multitasking feels productive, but it fractures attention. And fractured attention weakens discipline. The mind becomes shallow, restless, easily bored. This is why people struggle to stay with anything. Books feel hard. Silence feels uncomfortable. Commitment feels heavy. It's not lack of ability. It's lack of trained attention. Why distraction feels so tempting. Distraction offers relief without effort. It requires nothing from you. No patience. No discomfort. No responsibility. But every moment of distraction teaches the mind to avoid depth. And depth is where meaning lives. This is why people feel busy but empty. Stimulated but unsatisfied. The cost of constant input. When the mind is constantly consuming, it loses its ability to create. When it is constantly reacting, it loses its ability to choose. When it is constantly entertained, it loses tolerance for effort. And effort is the doorway to freedom. Not intensity. Effort. Why stillness feels threatening. Stillness removes distraction. And without distraction, the mind is forced to face itself. Untrained minds resist this. They label stillness as boring or pointless. But boredom is not the problem. Unfamiliar attention is. Attention is power returned. When you reclaim attention, something shifts. Thoughts slow down. Emotions become clearer. Reactivity weakens. Choice strengthens. This is not magic. It is training. A simple shift that changes everything. Instead of asking, "How do I stop this habit?" ask, "What am I feeding?" Habits starve when attention leaves. They don't need to be fought. They need to be unfed. Why attention creates identity. You become what you attend to. Not immediately, but inevitably. Attention shapes perception. Perception shapes belief. Belief shapes action. Action shapes life. This chain is always running. Right now, notice where your attention is. Not where you want it to be. Where it actually is. That awareness alone is the beginning of change. In the next part of this chapter, we'll talk about how to reclaim attention without force, without isolation, and without becoming rigid. What you give attention to begins to decide for you. There is a reason attention matters so much. Whatever holds your attention begins to direct your behavior. Not loudly, not forcefully, quietly. The mind follows what it looks at. And most people are not watching where their mind is going. Why attention becomes authority. The mind assumes that whatever you focus on must be important. It doesn't ask why. It doesn't question value. It simply says, "This matters." So if you repeatedly give attention to fear, it grows. Comparison, it grows. Distraction, it grows. Negativity, it grows. This is not because you want these things. It's because attention is permission. How attention trains emotional response. Every time you react emotionally, attention follows the feeling. And whatever attention touches, the mind memorizes. This is how emotional reactions become habits. Not through intensity, but through repetition. The emotion appears. Attention locks onto it. The body reacts. And the pattern strengthens. Why overthinking feels productive. Overthinking survives because it feels like effort. It feels like problem solving. It feels responsible. But overthinking is attention without direction. It spins without resolving. It consumes energy without producing clarity. And because attention stays locked on the same thought, the thought gains power. The more you think about a problem without acting, the heavier it becomes. The difference between focus and fixation. Focus moves toward solution. Fixation circles the problem. Focus creates clarity. Fixation creates tension. But fixation feels safer because it avoids action. Action carries risk. Fixation carries familiarity. This is how attention can trap you without you noticing. Why attention drains energy. Energy follows attention. Whatever you focus on draws from your mental reserves. This is why constant negativity is exhausting. Why scrolling leaves you tired. Why worrying drains you faster than effort. Your energy is being spent, just not intentionally. The illusion of "I'll just check." Most attention loss doesn't feel dramatic. It sounds like, "I'll just check." "I'll just look for a second." "I'll deal with this later." But attention doesn't work in seconds. It works in momentum. Once pulled, it resists return. Why silence is so powerful. Silence interrupts attention loops. It removes external pull and forces the mind to settle. This is why silence feels uncomfortable at first, because attention has been trained outward. But discomfort here is not danger. It is reorientation. Reclaiming attention without force. You don't reclaim attention by restricting everything. That creates rebellion. You reclaim attention by choosing one thing and staying with it longer than your mind wants to. A page, a breath, a task. This is how attention rebuilds strength. Why discipline begins with attention. Discipline is not about intensity. It's about direction. And direction comes from where attention rests. If attention is trained, discipline follows naturally. If attention is scattered, discipline feels impossible. The hidden freedom of focus. A focused mind is a calm mind, not because nothing goes wrong, but because attention isn't dragged everywhere. You stop being pulled by every thought. You stop reacting to every feeling. You begin to live from intention. A gentle exercise. Pick one moment today and stay fully present. No multitasking. No background noise. Just awareness. That moment is training. Not productivity, training. Why this changes identity. As attention strengthens, identity shifts. You stop saying, "I can't focus." You start experiencing, "I am present." Presence changes everything. It returns agency. Attention is not something you lose. It is something you give. And what you give it to decides who you become. In the next chapter, we'll talk about stillness, not as peace, but as a skill that trains the mind to hold itself. Chapter 7: Stillness is a skill, not a personality trait. Why stillness feels so hard. Most people say they want peace. They say they want calm. They say they want clarity. But when life finally slows down, they feel uncomfortable, restless, uneasy, pulled toward noise. This confuses people. If I want peace, they ask, why does stillness feel so difficult? The answer is simple. Stillness is not natural anymore. It is untrained. Why stillness was never the problem. Stillness itself is not painful. What rises in stillness is, when the noise stops, the mind speaks. Old worries surface. Unfinished emotions appear. Avoided thoughts return. So the mind learns something dangerous. Stillness is unsafe. And from that point on, it avoids it. How noise became normal. Modern life trains constant input. Music while working. Videos while eating. Scrolling while resting. Silence is treated like a problem to fix. But silence is not emptiness. It is space. And space reveals what has been ignored. That's why stillness feels heavy at first. Not because it harms you, but because it shows you something. Stillness is a skill, not a mood. People wait to feel calm before being still. That day rarely comes. Stillness is not the reward. It is the practice. You don't become calm and then sit still. You sit still, and calm slowly emerges. This is backwards from how most people try. Why avoidance feels easier than stillness. Avoidance moves you away from discomfort. Stillness moves you through it. The mind prefers escape, because escape feels like relief. But relief without awareness always returns stronger. Stillness does not remove discomfort immediately. It teaches you how to stay present with it. That ability changes everything. The body remembers what the mind avoided. Unprocessed emotion doesn't disappear. It settles in the body. Tension, restlessness, fatigue. Stillness brings these sensations into awareness. And awareness is the beginning of release. But release takes patience. That's why people flee back to noise. They don't trust the process. Why stillness feels like losing control. When you're busy, you feel in control. When you're distracted, you feel occupied. When you're still, you feel exposed. The mind mistakes exposure for danger. But exposure is not harm. It is honesty. The first stage of training stillness. The first stage is discomfort. Not peace. Not clarity. Discomfort. Your mind will look for exits. Thoughts will race. The urge to move will rise. This does not mean you're doing it wrong. It means training has begun. Why short moments matter. Stillness does not start with long sessions. It starts with seconds. A pause before reacting. A breath before responding. A moment without reaching for distraction. These moments rebuild tolerance. Not tolerance for boredom. Tolerance for presence. Presence is the muscle you're building. Presence is the ability to stay. With discomfort. With uncertainty. With yourself. Every moment you stay instead of escape strengthens that muscle. And that muscle becomes self-command. Why stillness is not isolation. Stillness is not cutting yourself off. It is reconnecting inward. It does not make you detached. It makes you grounded. A grounded person is not reactive. They are responsive. That difference shapes relationships, work, and self-respect. A gentle practice. Choose one small window today. No phone. No noise. Just sit. If the mind resists, notice the resistance. That noticing is the practice. Not peace. Not calm. Awareness. Stillness is not a personality trait. It is a skill that returns command to the mind. It teaches you how to stay present, without needing escape. In the next part of this chapter, we'll talk about how stillness trains discipline. Not through force, but through familiarity. How stillness trains discipline quietly. Discipline is often misunderstood. People imagine force, rigidity, pressure. They think discipline means pushing harder. But real discipline does not begin with force. It begins with familiarity. And stillness is how familiarity is built. Why discipline feels hard without stillness. Without stillness, the mind never rests in one place. It jumps. It reacts. It escapes. A restless mind cannot hold direction. It needs constant stimulation to feel okay. That's why discipline feels exhausting for many people. They're trying to control a mind that has never learned how to stay. Stillness teaches the mind to stay. Every moment of stillness teaches the mind something simple. I can be here without running. That message weakens impulse. It slows reaction. And slowly, the mind stops panicking at discomfort. This is the root of discipline. Not obedience. Tolerance. Why impulse loses power in stillness? Impulse survives on urgency. It says, now, immediately, before you think. Stillness removes urgency. It stretches the moment. And when urgency disappears, impulse weakens. This is why disciplined people look calm. Not because they don't feel urges, but because the urges don't rush them. The difference between suppression and training. Suppression fights urges. Training outlasts them. Suppression says, don't feel this. Training says, I can feel this and stay. That difference is everything. Because whatever you suppress returns stronger. Whatever you stay with loses its grip. Why stillness feels boring at first. Boredom is not emptiness. It is withdrawal. The mind is withdrawing from constant stimulation. Just like the body withdraws from sugar or noise. That discomfort is temporary. But most people never stay long enough to see what's underneath. Under boredom is clarity. Under clarity is direction. How stillness builds trust in yourself. Each time you remain still when you want to escape, you prove something to yourself. I don't have to run. I can stay present. Self-trust grows quietly from moments like this. Not from big wins. From small, repeated stays. Why this changes daily life. When stillness becomes familiar, everything slows internally. Decisions become clearer. Emotions feel manageable. Reactions soften. And discipline stops feeling like effort. It becomes alignment. Stillness is the ground discipline stands on. Without stillness, discipline collapses under stress. With stillness, discipline adapts. You stop forcing yourself forward. You move deliberately. And deliberate movement lasts longer. A realistic expectation. Stillness will not always feel peaceful. Some days it will feel heavy. Other days it will feel neutral. Occasionally, it will feel clear. All of this is normal. Stillness is not about how it feels. It's about what it builds. The long-term effect. Over time, the mind stops demanding constant relief. It becomes comfortable with presence. And from that comfort, discipline emerges naturally. Not as pressure, but as direction. Stillness is not passive. It is active training. It teaches the mind how to hold itself, how to stay, how to choose deliberately. This is the foundation of mental freedom. Stillness teaches you how to stop. It shows you what happens when you no longer react immediately. But stillness alone is not enough. You can sit in silence and still return to the same habits. You can pause, and then continue drifting. Stillness reveals the mind. Training changes it. Once you can notice your thoughts without being pulled by them, the next question becomes unavoidable. What do you do after you notice? Because awareness without practice fades, and insight without repetition does not last. The mind does not change through force, but it does not change through observation alone either. Change begins when awareness becomes something you return to, again and again. Not violently, not perfectly, but deliberately. Chapter 8. Training the Mind Without Violence. Why force never works. Most people think training the mind means control, force, discipline, pressure. They imagine snapping thoughts into place, crushing distractions. They try to overpower the mind. And when that fails, they assume they are weak. But the mind was never meant to be conquered. It was meant to be trained. And there is a difference. Violence creates resistance. Training creates alignment. When you attack the mind, it fights back. When you understand it, it cooperates. This is where most people lose the battle before it starts. They mistake harshness for discipline. They believe suffering equals progress. It doesn't. It only creates exhaustion. And exhaustion leads back to comfort. An untrained mind does not need punishment. It needs guidance. Think of how habits form. Quietly, repeatedly. No habit was ever created through shouting. It was created through repetition. The mind learns by exposure, not aggression. By return, not force. Violence toward the mind usually sounds like this. Why am I like this? Why can't I just focus? What's wrong with me? Those questions feel motivating. They are not. They collapse attention instead of strengthening it. They turn awareness into shame. And shame makes the mind hide, not improve. Training begins when you stop fighting your thoughts. Not by obeying them, but by noticing them. This is subtle. And because it's subtle, people underestimate it. Noticing is effort. Quiet effort. And quiet effort is how the mind actually changes. When a thought appears, I don't feel like doing this, I'll start later, this doesn't matter. Training does not respond with force. It responds with recognition. That is a thought, not a command. This small separation is everything. It breaks the spell. Most people never separate from their thoughts. They fuse with them. So every thought feels like truth. Every impulse feels like identity. Training is the slow unfusing, the steady reclaiming of space. This is why violence fails. Because force collapses awareness. You cannot observe and attack at the same time. You either see or you strike. And seeing is what trains the mind. Not striking. The goal is not silence. Thoughts will always appear. The goal is authority. Who decides what happens next? Authority does not come from pressure. It comes from consistency. Think about how a muscle grows. Not from one extreme workout, but from small, repeated tension. Then rest. Then return. The mind is the same. Except the weight is attention. Each time you notice a thought and don't obey it, you strengthen that muscle. This is why training must be gentle. Gentle does not mean weak. It means sustainable, repeatable, Violence burns energy fast. Gentleness preserves it. And preservation allows repetition. Repetition builds change. Here is a truth most people resist. You do not train the mind by winning. You train it by returning. Again and again. Every return is a rep. Every rep builds authority. You will notice distraction. You will drift. That is not failure. That is the moment of training. The moment you return, without judgment, is the exact moment the mind learns. Violence says, you shouldn't have drifted. Training says, you noticed. Good. That difference determines everything. One builds fear. The other builds skill. This chapter matters because without this understanding, everything that follows becomes harsh. Rules become punishment. Discipline becomes self-attack. And the mind rebels. Silently, by returning to comfort. Training the mind without violence is not soft. It is precise. It requires honesty, consistency, and the willingness to return without drama. Every single time. In the next part, we'll talk about how this training actually looks day to day, in real moments, real distractions, real life. Not theory. Practice. What training actually looks like. Most people ask the wrong question. They ask, how do I control my mind? That question already assumes a fight. Training does not begin with control. It begins with relationship. You do not dominate what you want to guide. You learn its patterns first. Training the mind is not something you do once a day. It is something you return to many times. Not in long sessions. In short moments. Real training happens inside ordinary life. Not away from it. It happens when you notice yourself reaching for distraction. Not after, during. It happens when you feel resistance rising. Before you obey it. It happens when a thought says, "This can wait." And instead of arguing, you pause. That pause is not dramatic. No one sees it. But that pause is where authority grows. Because authority begins with interruption. Most people believe training requires intensity. It does not. It requires frequency. Small, repeated acts of noticing. Here is what training looks like in practice. A thought appears, I don't feel like this. You do not fight it. You do not obey it. You label it. That is resistance. Then you act anyway, calmly. That is one repetition. Another moment. Your mind wanders while reading. You notice. You return. No frustration. No story. Just return. That is another repetition. Training is not about eliminating distraction. Distraction is inevitable. Training is about shortening the time you stay lost. That is all. At first, you may notice after minutes. Then seconds. Eventually, mid-thought. That is progress. This is why violence never works. Because violence punishes noticing. And noticing is the skill you're trying to build. You cannot shame a muscle into strength. Gentle training keeps the nervous system calm. And calm allows attention to stay online. When the system feels threatened, it reverts to habit. That is biology. So training the mind requires safety. Not comfort, safety. Safety to notice without attack. Safety to return without judgment. This is why harsh discipline fails long-term. It creates compliance, not mastery. Compliance collapses when pressure lifts. Mastery stays. Another mistake people make is overcorrecting. They try to train everything at once. That overwhelms attention. And overwhelmed attention shuts down. Training works best when it is narrow. One focus at a time. Choose one area. Your attention while working, or your reaction when discomfort appears. Stay there. Return there. That repetition creates depth. A trained mind is not rigid. It is responsive. It can notice fatigue without collapsing. It can feel emotion without obeying it. That flexibility is strength. Training also means allowing failure without drama. You will forget. You will drift. You will obey thoughts sometimes. That does not undo training. Quitting does. Each time you notice you've slipped and return, you reinforce authority. Authority is not never slipping. Authority is returning early. Over time, something changes quietly. Thoughts lose urgency. Not because they disappear, but because you no longer rush to serve them. This is how training becomes internal order. Not silence. Order. Thoughts still arise. But they wait. That waiting is freedom. Not freedom from thinking, freedom from compulsion. By now, you may notice something important. Training the mind is not about becoming someone new. It is about reclaiming command. Command you already had, but stopped using. In the next chapter, we will explore what happens when thoughts truly lose authority. Not temporarily. Structurally. What life feels like when reactions no longer lead. Training teaches you how to return. But something deeper happens when you return enough times. Thoughts stop sounding like orders. They become information. And that shift changes everything. Chapter 9. When Thoughts Lose Authority. The shift most people never reach. For most of your life, your thoughts have spoken first. And you have followed. Not because they were wise, but because they were loud. A thought appeared, and action followed. I'm tired. I don't feel like it. I'll do it later. And later, quietly, your life adjusted itself around those thoughts. This is not a failure. It's how untrained minds operate. Thoughts feel authoritative because they arrive confidently. They do not ask permission. They state. They suggest. They pressure. And without training, pressure feels like truth. When thoughts have authority, they decide your mood. They decide your energy. They decide your behavior. You don't choose how you feel. You react. You don't decide what matters. You respond. And over time, this becomes your identity. People say, "That's just how I am." What they mean is, "That's how my thoughts run me." But identity is not built from thoughts. It is built from obedience. What you obey repeatedly becomes who you are, not what you think. This chapter is about what happens when that obedience breaks. Not through force. Through clarity. When thoughts stop feeling like commands and start sounding like noise. This shift does not feel dramatic. There is no explosion. No sudden silence. No perfect calm. Instead, something subtler happens. A thought appears, and nothing follows. At first, this feels strange. Unnatural. Your body expects movement. Your habits expect compliance. But nothing happens. You don't argue. You don't obey. You wait. That waiting is authority. Most people never experience this. They move too fast. They either suppress thoughts or surrender to them. They never let a thought pass without action. And because of that, thoughts remain powerful. Authority is lost when thoughts are questioned. Not aggressively, not emotionally, but consistently. The same way authority is lost in any system. Imagine a rule that is never enforced. Eventually, it stops being a rule. Thoughts work the same way. When they stop being obeyed, they stop commanding. This does not mean thoughts disappear. They still arrive. But their tone changes. They soften. They no longer rush you. They wait. This is where people get confused. They think freedom means silence. It doesn't. Freedom means choice. The ability to hear a thought without becoming it. Here is a simple example. A thought says, "I don't feel like doing this." Before training, that thought ends the action. After training, it becomes information. You might still feel tired. But you decide. That decision is not emotional. It's structural. It comes from repetition, not willpower. This is why Chapter 8 mattered. Training creates the conditions for this shift. Without training, authority never transfers. At first, thoughts resist losing control. They get louder, more convincing, more emotional. This is normal. Authority always resists being challenged. If you mistake this resistance for failure, you return to obedience. But if you stay calm, something breaks. Not you. The pattern. Thoughts rely on urgency. Remove urgency, and they weaken. They rely on immediacy. Delay response, and they soften. This is the moment people describe as space. Not empty space. Decision space. Room between stimulus and response. That room is freedom. Freedom is not doing whatever you want. It is choosing what you do. Even when thoughts disagree. Especially then. As thoughts lose authority, something else strengthens. Your sense of self. Not identity. Command. You stop asking, "What do I feel like doing?" and start asking, "What did I decide matters?" That question changes everything. In the next part, we'll talk about what life actually feels like when thoughts no longer rule your behavior. Not perfectly, but reliably. Living without obedience. When thoughts lose authority, life does not become quiet. It becomes clear. You still hear doubt. You still hear resistance. But they no longer sit at the center. They move to the edges. And that changes how you live. Before the shift, your days were shaped by reaction. You did what felt easiest. You avoided what felt heavy. You postponed what felt uncomfortable. Not because you chose that life, but because your thoughts chose for you. After the shift, something subtle happens. You still feel resistance, but you no longer wait for it to leave. You feel doubt, but you don't stop moving. You hear excuses, but you don't negotiate. This is where people misunderstand freedom. They think freedom means ease. But real freedom often feels neutral, unemotional. You act because you decided to, not because you feel inspired. When thoughts lose authority, emotions stop steering. They inform, but they don't decide. That does not make you cold. It makes you reliable. Reliability is quiet power. It means when you say, "I will," you mean it. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because nothing inside you is fighting for control. This is what people feel when they say, "I finally trust myself." That trust does not come from motivation. It comes from repeated non-obedience. From choosing action even when thoughts protest. At first, this feels uncomfortable. Not painful. Unfamiliar. You may notice empty space where impulse used to live. A pause that feels awkward. That pause is not confusion. It is command forming. Most people rush to fill that space. They distract themselves. They re-engage noise. But if you stay there, something settles. You begin to feel grounded. Not emotionally high. Not emotionally low. Just present. This presence changes how you make decisions. You no longer ask, "What do I feel like?" You ask, "What aligns with who I am choosing to be?" That question doesn't create pressure. It creates direction. Direction reduces anxiety. Because indecision disappears. This is why trained minds feel calm. Not because life is easy, but because fewer internal arguments exist. Arguments drain energy. Decision restores it. Thoughts losing authority does not mean you never struggle. It means struggle no longer owns you. You notice tension, and you move anyway. You notice fear, and you continue calmly. This is how confidence is built. Not through success. Through follow-through. Confidence is the memory of kept decisions. People think confidence comes before action. It comes after. And thoughts lose authority when action no longer waits for approval. Here is something important to understand. Thoughts never fully disappear. They just lose their vote. They become advisors, not rulers. A trained mind listens, then decides. An untrained mind hears, then reacts. That difference defines freedom. This is also where responsibility becomes lighter. When you are no longer dragged by impulse, choices feel clean. You stop blaming mood. You stop blaming circumstances. You take ownership, not with heaviness, but with clarity. Clarity removes drama. Drama feeds thoughts. Without drama, thoughts weaken further. This is a reinforcing loop, in the right direction. Over time, people may notice something about you. You don't rush. You don't overreact. You don't explain yourself excessively. Because nothing inside you is panicking. That calm is not personality. It is structure. Inner order. When thoughts lose authority, your attention becomes available. Not scattered. Not consumed. Available. That availability is what allows meaning to return. You notice life again. Not through excitement, through presence. This is where people say, "I feel awake." Not motivated. Awake. Awareness without obedience is freedom. Not freedom from effort, freedom from being pushed. You still train. You still practice. But now you practice from command, not desperation. This chapter matters because it marks the turning point. Before this, you were learning to see. After this, you begin to live differently. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when this inner authority becomes stable. Not momentary, not fragile, but structured enough to support a life. When thoughts lose authority, something else takes its place. Not force, not fear, order. And order is where freedom becomes sustainable. Chapter 10: The Freedom of Inner Order. Why chaos feels normal, but isn't. Most people think their life feels chaotic because life is chaotic. They believe disorder is just how things are. Too many responsibilities. Too many distractions. Too much pressure. But that's not the real reason. The chaos you feel outside usually reflects the lack of order inside. An untrained mind creates noise. Not intentionally, automatically. Thoughts overlap. Emotions interrupt. Urgency replaces priority. Reaction replaces choice. This internal disorder feels normal because it's familiar. Most people have lived inside it their entire lives. They don't remember what inner order feels like. So they assume chaos is human nature. It's not. Order is not personality. It's structure. And structure can be built. When thoughts still had authority over you, your inner world was run by impulse. Whatever spoke loudest led. Whatever felt strongest won. That system creates exhaustion. Because nothing ever settles. Inner order begins when leadership returns. Not external leadership, internal. Someone inside decides what comes first. And that someone is no longer impulse. Order does not mean rigidity. It means alignment. Thoughts know their place. Emotions know their role. Attention has direction. Action has intention. This is what people describe as mental peace. But peace is not emptiness. It is arrangement. Think of a room. A messy room and an empty room are not the same. A calm mind is not empty. It is organized. Without inner order, even good intentions fail. You want to focus, but can't. You want consistency, but drift. You want change, but stall. Not because you are weak. Because there is no structure to hold behavior. Structure removes friction. When order exists, fewer decisions drain you. You don't constantly debate. You don't renegotiate your values every day. You simply act. This is where freedom begins to feel stable. Not exciting, stable. You stop swinging between extremes. Motivation and collapse. Hope and frustration. Intensity and burnout. Order smooths the system. And smooth systems conserve energy. This is why disciplined people look calm. Not because life is easier, but because fewer things compete for control. Inner order means fewer internal arguments. When you decide once, you don't argue daily. That silence is not emptiness. It's efficiency. Order also changes how failure feels. Without order, failure feels personal. With order, failure feels informational. You adjust, not collapse. This is why people with inner order recover faster. They don't spiral. They respond. Order creates distance between event and identity. Something goes wrong, but you remain steady. Your sense of self is no longer fragile, because it's supported by structure. This chapter matters because without order, freedom cannot last. Freedom without order turns into drift. Drift turns into regret. Regret turns into numbness. Inner order prevents fading. Not by force, by clarity. In the next part, we'll explore how inner order is built, and why it must be simple to survive real life. Not perfect. Just reliable. How order is built, and why it lasts. Inner order does not come from control. It comes from agreement. An agreement between what you decide and what you do. Most people live with broken agreements inside themselves. They decide one thing and do another. Over time, this creates noise. Not guilt, distrust. When you don't trust yourself, everything feels unstable. You hesitate. You overthink. You second-guess simple actions. Because nothing inside feels solid. Inner order begins the moment decisions start holding. Not big ones. Small ones. You say you'll start, and you do. You say you'll stop, and you stop. That consistency builds structure quietly. Order is not built by ambition. It is built by follow-through. Ambition excites the mind. Follow-through trains it. This is why people fail when they aim too high. They break too many internal promises at once. And broken promises weaken authority. Inner order thrives on simplicity. Few rules. Clear rules. Rules you can keep even on bad days. Especially on bad days. A mind with 10 rules keeps none. A mind with 2 reliable ones feels strong. Order also requires rhythm. When things happen at roughly the same time each day, the mind relaxes. It stops negotiating. It stops resisting. Routine is not a cage. It is relief. Relief comes from knowing what happens next. Uncertainty drains energy. Order reduces uncertainty inside you. Even when life outside is unpredictable. This is why people with inner order feel calm in chaos. They carry stability with them. Their center does not depend on conditions. Order also changes how you use attention. Instead of reacting to everything, you allocate focus deliberately. Not everything deserves your energy. Order helps you decide that early. Without order, attention is pulled. With order, attention is placed. That difference protects your mind. Inner order does not eliminate emotion. It contextualizes it. You feel anger, but you don't explode. You feel sadness, but you don't collapse. Emotion becomes information, not instruction. This makes your reactions smaller. Not weaker, smaller. You recover faster. You adapt sooner. Another quiet benefit of inner order is reduced self-criticism. When actions align with decisions, there is nothing to argue about. The mind relaxes. Order silences the inner courtroom. No prosecution. No defense. Just action. This is why people with inner order don't talk much about discipline. They don't need to. Their life shows it. Order also protects freedom. Without structure, freedom turns into chaos. With structure, freedom becomes usable. Think of freedom like space. Space without walls is endless and unusable. Space with structure becomes a home. Inner order gives freedom walls. Not to trap you, to support you. This is where responsibility feels lighter. Because you are no longer fighting yourself. Life still requires effort. But effort is no longer wasted. The final truth of inner order is this. It is invisible. No one applauds it. No one notices it immediately. But it determines everything. Careers are built on it. Relationships depend on it. Self-respect grows from it. Peace rests on it. This is why freedom lasts here. Not because nothing goes wrong, but because nothing inside collapses. In the next chapter, we will explore what life looks like when you live from choice instead of reaction. Not occasionally. Consistently. When inner order stabilizes, reaction no longer leads. Choice does. And that changes how you live. Chapter 11. Living from choice, not reaction. The moment you stop being pulled. Most people believe they are making choices. But they are mostly reacting. Something happens. They feel something. They respond. That sequence runs quietly all day. Message, emotion, reaction, noise, tension, escape, discomfort, delay, avoidance. And because this happens fast, it feels intentional. It isn't. It's automatic. Reaction is the default state of the untrained mind. It responds before it considers. Choice requires space. And space is not natural. It must be built. When you lived under the authority of thoughts, reaction made sense. Thoughts spoke. You moved. There was no gap. No pause. No question. Now something has changed. You've learned to notice. You've learned to return. You've built inner order. That order creates space. And in that space, reaction weakens. At first, this space feels uncomfortable. Like standing still on moving ground. You feel the urge to respond quickly. To fill the silence. But if you wait, the urge passes. That passing is important. It proves something. You are not your reactions. You are just moving too fast to notice. Living from choice does not mean you hesitate endlessly. It means you act after awareness, not before it. Reaction skips awareness. Choice requires it. This difference shows up in small moments. Someone speaks sharply. Your chest tightens. Reaction wants to defend. Choice waits. Waiting does not mean silence forever. It means response instead of reflex. Or consider distraction. You feel boredom. Your hand moves to your phone. Reaction scrolls. Choice notices the urge. And sometimes still scrolls, but consciously. That distinction matters. Because reaction is unconscious obedience. Choice is ownership. Ownership is the core of freedom. Not freedom from rules, freedom from being pushed. Most people think reacting saves time. It doesn't. It wastes energy. Every reaction creates cleanup. Emotional reactions create regret. Mental reactions create confusion. Impulsive reactions create mess. Avoidant reactions create delay. Choice feels slower at first, because it interrupts momentum. But over time, it reduces friction. When you live from choice, fewer situations escalate. Fewer problems multiply. You don't have to fix what never broke. This is why people who live from choice appear calm. Not because they don't feel, but because they don't amplify. Reaction amplifies emotion. Choice contains it. Containment is not suppression. It is direction. Here is a key truth. Choice does not remove emotion. It organizes it. When reaction leads, emotions pile up. They overlap. They collide. When choice leads, emotions line up. They wait their turn. This is what emotional maturity actually is. Not numbness. Not control. Sequencing. Living from choice also changes how you experience pressure. Pressure without choice feels overwhelming. Pressure with choice feels manageable. Because you are no longer trapped inside it. You stop asking, "How do I get out of this?" and start asking, "What is the next correct action?" That question is grounding. It brings attention back to what you can control. Reaction always looks for relief. Choice looks for alignment. Relief is temporary. Alignment lasts. This is why reaction creates cycles. The same problems repeat. Choice creates progress, even when it's slow. At this stage, you may notice something surprising. Life feels quieter. Not easier, quieter. Fewer internal arguments. Fewer emotional storms. That quiet is not emptiness. It is capacity. You finally have room to think, to plan, to decide. This is where real responsibility begins. Not responsibility as burden, responsibility as agency. Agency means you can pause. And pausing means you can choose. In the next part of this chapter, we will explore how living from choice reshapes relationships, work, self-respect, and why people who live this way rarely go back. What choice changes in real life? Living from choice doesn't announce itself. It shows up quietly in how you move through ordinary moments. The way you respond to people. The way you handle pressure. The way you speak to yourself when no one else is listening. This is where the difference becomes visible. Let's start with relationships. Most conflicts don't begin with words. They begin with reactions. Someone says something. You feel dismissed. You react. Tone sharpens. Defensiveness rises. The moment is lost. Reaction wants to win. Choice wants to understand. When you live from reaction, you hear threat where there may be none. When you live from choice, you listen before deciding what it means. This doesn't mean you tolerate disrespect. It means you respond with clarity instead of impulse. You stop saying things just to release emotion. You start saying things that actually resolve something. That alone changes everything. Arguments shorten. Misunderstandings reduce. Trust grows. People feel safer around someone who lives from choice. Not because they are passive, but because they are predictable in a healthy way. They don't explode. They don't withdraw suddenly. They don't confuse intensity with honesty. They pause. And that pause communicates maturity. Now consider work. Most people work from reaction. They react to deadlines. They react to stress. They react to urgency. And because of that, they live in constant pressure. Reaction creates chaos disguised as productivity. Always busy. Rarely intentional. Choice changes the rhythm. When you live from choice, you decide before the pressure arrives. You plan. You prioritize. You act early. That removes panic. You don't wait until things are urgent to care. You care while things are still manageable. This is why disciplined people appear calm. They're not calmer by nature, they're earlier by choice. Reaction lives late. Choice lives ahead. This also affects confidence. Confidence does not come from positive thinking. It comes from reliability. When you consistently choose instead of react, you become someone you trust. That trust becomes quiet confidence. You stop over-explaining. You stop seeking reassurance. You stop doubting every decision. Not because you're always right, but because you know you will respond well even if you're wrong. That's real confidence. Not ego. Not certainty. Capability. Living from choice also changes how you handle discomfort. Reaction avoids discomfort. Choice engages it selectively. You stop asking, "How do I escape this feeling?" and start asking, "What does this moment require from me?" Sometimes the answer is action. Sometimes it's rest. Sometimes it's conversation. Sometimes it's silence. But the key is this: you decide. This prevents emotional buildup. Most burnout doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from reacting too long. Constant urgency without direction exhausts the mind. Choice restores energy, because your actions start matching your values. You'll also notice something subtle. Your inner dialogue changes. Reaction speaks harshly. You messed up. You always do this. You should have known better. Choice speaks clearly. That didn't work. Adjust. Try again. That difference determines resilience. Reaction collapses under mistakes. Choice learns from them. This is why people who live from choice don't spiral easily. They don't dramatize errors. They correct them. Let's talk about decision-making. Reaction decides fast and regrets later. Choice considers briefly and stands firm. You don't need endless analysis. You need alignment. Alignment comes from knowing what matters. Living from choice requires clarity. Not clarity about everything, clarity about priorities. When your priorities are clear, decisions become simpler. You stop asking, "What do I feel like doing?" and start asking, "What supports the life I'm building?" That question is powerful. It filters distractions. It exposes avoidance. It simplifies action. At this stage, something important happens. Your life begins to feel authored. Not perfect. Not controlled. But intentional. You no longer feel dragged through days. You move through them. This is the shift from surviving to steering. And here's the truth many people miss. Living from choice doesn't eliminate reaction forever. You will still react sometimes. That's human. But you recover faster. Instead of spiraling, you notice. Instead of judging yourself, you return. That return is mastery. Mastery is not never falling. It's shortening the distance between falling and standing. This chapter matters because it represents a turning point. You are no longer just training the mind. You are living the training. In the next chapter, we will explore what happens when thoughts lose authority entirely, not through force, but through consistency. That is where real freedom stabilizes. Not as an idea, but as a way of being. Chapter 12. Keeping the mind trained daily. Why training never ends. Most people misunderstand what training means. They think it's something you do until things improve. Until life feels calmer. Until the mind feels quieter. Until habits feel easier. Then they stop. And slowly, without realizing it, they drift back. The truth is simple. A trained mind is not something you achieve. It is something you maintain. Just like your body. You don't exercise once and stay strong forever. You don't eat well for a week and stay healthy for life. The mind works the same way. This is not a failure. It's reality. The mind is always learning. The only question is what it's learning from. If you don't train your mind, it trains itself. From noise. From distraction. From emotion. From repetition. And it always chooses the easiest pattern. Not the best one. This is why people lose progress. Not because they were weak, but because they stopped practicing. They assumed awareness was permanent. It's not. Awareness fades without attention. Clarity fades without structure. Choice fades without repetition. Daily training is not intense. It's subtle. It happens in small moments. Moments most people ignore. The pause before reacting. The decision to focus. The choice to stop scrolling. The moment you redirect a thought. That's training. Not motivation. Not inspiration. Most people wait for a strong feeling to change. But training doesn't wait for feelings. It works with or without them. This is important. If your discipline depends on mood, you don't have discipline, you have cooperation. And cooperation disappears when life gets heavy. Training stays. Let's be clear about something. Training the mind does not mean controlling every thought. That's impossible. Thoughts arise automatically. Training means choosing what you engage with. You don't stop the knock. You decide whether to open the door. Most people live with every door open. Every thought enters. Every feeling takes over. Every impulse gets a vote. Training teaches selectiveness. Not every thought deserves attention. Not every emotion deserves obedience. This is how freedom becomes practical. Not by silence, but by order. Daily training starts with something very small. Not changing your life. Not fixing everything. Just noticing. Noticing when your mind drifts. Noticing when you react. Noticing when you avoid. No judgment. Just awareness. Awareness is the entry point. Without it, nothing else works. This is why training must be daily. Because the mind drifts daily. Some days you'll notice immediately. Other days, hours later. That's okay. Training is not about speed. It's about return. Every time you return to awareness, you strengthen the habit of choice. That habit becomes your anchor. Without daily training, something else happens. You start confusing familiarity with truth. Just because a thought repeats doesn't mean it's right. The mind repeats what it has practiced. If you practiced worry, it worries. If you practice distraction, it drifts. If you practiced avoidance, it resists effort. Training interrupts this loop. Not by force, by consistency. This is why small daily practices beat intense effort. Intensity burns out. Consistency rewires. A trained mind doesn't feel tense. It feels steady. It doesn't panic easily. It doesn't rush decisions. It doesn't chase stimulation constantly. It rests in clarity. And clarity requires maintenance. In the next part of this chapter, we will get very practical. Simple daily practices. Realistic habits. No spiritual language. No perfection. Just how to keep the mind trained while living a normal life. What daily training actually looks like. Most people ask the wrong question. They ask, how do I stay disciplined? A better question is, what do I return to when I drift? Because drifting is not the problem. Drifting is human. The problem is staying lost. A trained mind is not a mind that never wanders. It's a mind that knows how to come back. Daily training begins with one simple rule. Interrupt gently. Not aggressively. Not with frustration. When you notice your mind racing, you don't shout at it. You pause. That pause, even half a second, is training. Most people miss this. They think training requires long sessions. It doesn't. Training happens in ordinary moments. While brushing your teeth. While standing in line. While opening your phone. Every moment you notice what you're doing, you create space. That space is where choice lives. Let's make this practical. Imagine you reach for your phone without thinking. That's autopilot. Training is not refusing the phone. Training is noticing the reach. And asking one quiet question. Why now? Not to judge. To understand. Often the answer is simple. Boredom. Restlessness. Avoidance. When you see the reason, you regain authority. Now you can choose. You might still scroll. That's okay. But you scrolled consciously. That alone changes the brain. Because the mind learns from awareness. Most people think training means saying no all the time. It doesn't. It means deciding why. Another daily practice is naming. When a strong thought appears, name it. Worry. Planning. Fear. Distraction. Naming creates distance. It reminds you, this is a thought, not a command. Without naming, thoughts blend into identity. With naming, they become objects you can handle. This is powerful. It's how thoughts lose authority. You don't argue with the thought. You don't suppress it. You acknowledge it. Acknowledgement without obedience is training. Another daily practice is returning to the body. When the mind spins, the body anchors. Notice your feet, your breath, your posture. The body lives in the present. The mind often does not. Returning to sensation brings you back. This is not meditation. It's grounding. You can do it anywhere. Even one conscious breath interrupts mental momentum. And momentum is what keeps people trapped. Thoughts feel powerful because they're continuous. Break the chain, and the intensity drops. Daily training also means ending loops. When you notice the same thought repeating, you don't follow it again. You say internally, "I've seen this." Then you redirect. Not to positivity, to reality. Look around. Name 3 things you see. That's training. You are teaching your mind. We don't live only in thought. Another key habit is keeping small promises. Not big goals. Small ones. If I say I'll stop at 10 minutes, I stop. If I say I'll take a walk, I take it. The mind learns trust through follow-through. Without trust, discipline collapses. Most people fail here because they overpromise. Training prefers realism. One kept promise is worth more than 10 broken intentions. Reliability trains freedom. Daily training also requires ending the day consciously. Before sleep, ask, where did I notice? Where did I drift? No guilt. Just reflection. Reflection strengthens awareness memory. The mind remembers what you review. This is how training compounds. Quietly. Slowly. Some days you'll feel sharp. Other days dull. Training continues anyway. Because training is not about performance. It's about presence. When daily training becomes normal, something changes. Thoughts lose urgency. Emotions lose control. Distractions lose grip. Not because they disappear, but because you are no longer owned by them. In the next part, we will talk about what happens when you miss days, and how to restart without self-attack. When you miss a day, and how you return. There will be days when you don't train. Not because you chose not to, but because life happened. You were tired, distracted, overwhelmed. You forgot. This is where most people lose everything they built. Not in chaos, in judgment. They notice they slipped, and then they attack themselves for it. That's it. I'm back to square one. I can't keep this up. That reaction does more damage than the missed day. Training is not fragile. Ego is. A trained mind does not collapse after absence. It returns. Missing a day is not failure. Turning it into a story is. The mind loves stories. Especially dramatic ones. Here is the rule that keeps training alive. Never miss twice. Not because missing is bad, but because returning is essential. The power is not in consistency alone. It's in recovery. Recovery teaches the mind resilience. Every time you return without punishment, you weaken the old pattern of self-attack. That alone trains freedom. Notice this. When you slip and return calmly, you prove something important. You are not controlled by perfection. Perfection creates fear. Fear creates avoidance. Training dissolves both. You don't need intensity to restart. You need honesty. Today I drifted. That's human. I return now. No apology. No punishment. Just return. This is how the trained mind speaks. Clear. Simple. Direct. Over time, something changes in your relationship with effort. Effort no longer feels heavy. It feels familiar. You stop asking, will I be able to do this long term? Because you understand something deeper. You don't rely on streaks. You rely on return. That knowledge creates calm. Calm removes pressure. Pressure kills discipline. Calm sustains it. Daily training does not make life rigid. It makes it spacious. Because fewer things pull you. You stop feeling dragged through the day. You move through it. This chapter matters because it removes the last illusion. The illusion that freedom is something you reach and keep. Freedom is something you practice. Daily. Imperfectly. Honestly. You don't need to win every day. You need to stay awake. Awake to your patterns. Awake to your choices. Awake to when you drift. And when you notice drifting, you return. That return is strength. This is how the mind stays trained. Not by force, by relationship. In the next chapter, we'll talk about what happens after training stabilizes. When the mind no longer fights, and self-command becomes quiet. When daily training becomes normal, something powerful emerges. You no longer need pressure to move. You move from inner command. Chapter 13: The Quiet Power of Self-Command. When you no longer need to push yourself. Most people think self-command looks aggressive. They imagine force, pressure, intensity. They picture someone yelling at themselves to move. That's not self-command. That's conflict. Real self-command is quiet. So quiet that most people miss it. It doesn't argue. It doesn't negotiate. It decides, and the body follows. This is what happens after training stabilizes. You stop forcing yourself to act. Not because you became lazy, but because resistance weakened. Before this stage, action required effort. You had to convince yourself. You had to hype yourself up. You had to fight distraction. That was necessary at first. But it was never meant to be permanent. Self-command emerges when effort becomes unnecessary. Not because action is easy, but because alignment exists. Alignment means your decisions and actions agree. No inner tug-of-war. No mental back and forth. No emotional bargaining. This is why self-command feels calm. There is no opposition inside you. Think about a moment when you didn't hesitate. You stood up. You spoke. You acted. No debate. No drama. That's self-command. Most people experience it rarely, in emergencies, crises, or moments of urgency. Training makes it normal. Here is the shift. You stop asking, "Do I feel like it?" and start acting from, "This is what I decided." There is no emotion in that sentence. That's the point. Self-command is not emotional. It is structural. Like gravity. Reliable. Consistent. This is why people confuse self-command with coldness. It's not cold. It's stable. When self-command is present, motivation becomes irrelevant. You don't wait for it. You don't chase it. You move without needing permission from mood. This is deeply freeing. Because moods change. If your life depends on them, your life is unstable. Self-command removes mood from leadership. Emotions still exist, they just don't decide. This does not make you robotic. It makes you dependable. Dependable people trust themselves. That trust creates calm. Calm reinforces command. This is a cycle, but a healthy one. Let's talk about how this shows up daily. You wake up. You don't debate getting up. You get up. Not angrily. Not heroically. Simply because that's what happens. You work. Not in bursts of panic. Not in waves of motivation. In steady motion. You stop when it's time to stop. You rest without guilt. You return without resistance. This is not discipline as punishment. This is discipline as order. Order removes friction. When friction disappears, effort feels lighter. This is why people with self-command seem naturally disciplined. They're not. They're just no longer fighting themselves. Conflict is exhausting. Alignment conserves energy. Another important shift happens here. Your identity stabilizes. You no longer see yourself as trying. You see yourself as someone who acts. That identity matters. Because behavior follows identity faster than motivation. You don't ask, "Should I do this?" You ask, "What does someone like me do next?" That question shortens decision time. Shorter decisions mean less hesitation. Self-command also changes how you experience pressure. Pressure no longer feels personal. It becomes information. Instead of panicking, you adjust. Instead of avoiding, you engage. This is not courage. It's clarity. Courage is emotional. Clarity is structural. Self-command is built on clarity. At this stage, you may notice something unexpected. Life feels quieter. Not empty, quieter. There are fewer internal voices. Fewer arguments. Fewer excuses. Fewer justifications. Silence grows, not because thoughts stopped, but because authority settled. This is the quiet power the chapter is named for. Power without display. Strength without tension. In the next part, we'll explore how self-command survives stress, what happens when old habits try to return, why this power must stay quiet to last, and how people lose it without realizing. Holding authority when life pushes back. Self-command is easiest when life is calm. The real test comes when pressure returns. Deadlines tighten. Emotions rise. Unexpected problems appear. This is where most people lose what they built. Not because they forgot everything, but because they panic. They mistake pressure for danger. And danger triggers reaction. Self-command does not disappear under pressure. It gets quieter. And if you're not listening carefully, you'll miss it. Under stress, the mind wants speed. It wants shortcuts. It wants relief. Reaction promises relief. Self-command promises direction. This is the moment where choice matters most. Not big choice, small ones. Do you rush, or do you slow your breath? Do you lash out, or do you pause? Do you abandon structure, or simplify it? Self-command survives stress by reducing, not increasing. Fewer decisions. Fewer commitments. Clearer priorities. Untrained minds add pressure when stressed. Trained minds subtract. This is why self-command feels calm even under weight. It removes unnecessary motion. Another truth people miss. Self-command is not stubbornness. It adapts. When conditions change, the command adjusts, The values do not. You may need to slow down. You may need to rest more. You may need to scale back. That is not weakness. That is leadership. Leadership inside yourself means listening without surrendering control. You hear fatigue, but you decide how to respond. This is where many people confuse self-command with self-neglect. They think being disciplined means ignoring limits. It doesn't. Ignoring limits is reaction. Respecting limits is command. Command says, "We slow down so we can continue." Reaction says, "Push until something breaks." Self-command protects continuity. Not speed. Not appearance. Continuity. This is why people with self-command don't burn out easily. They notice early signals. They respond before collapse. Another challenge arrives later. Comfort. When things start working, effort feels optional. This is where self-command must stay quiet but firm. No speeches. No intensity. Just consistency. Self-command does not announce progress. It continues routines even when praise disappears. This is why many people lose discipline after success. They confuse ease with completion. Self-command understands something deeper. There is no finish line. Not in training. Not in growth. Not in awareness. There is only maintenance. And maintenance is invisible. Invisible effort feels pointless to the ego. But it's essential to freedom. Another threat to self-command is comparison. Watching others. Measuring pace. Doubting timing. Comparison weakens authority. It hands leadership back to external voices. Self-command brings leadership home. You move at your pace. You follow your structure. This does not mean isolation. It means internal clarity. When self-command is strong, feedback becomes information, not instruction. You listen, but you decide. This is the difference between influence and control. Others may influence you. They no longer control you. Self-command also changes how you fail. Failure no longer shakes identity. It becomes a moment, not a verdict. You adjust without self-attack. You correct without drama. Drama feeds chaos. Self-command starves it. Over time, this changes how people experience you. They may say you seem grounded, or steady, or difficult to shake. That's not personality. That's structure. Structure holds when emotion rises. And emotion will always rise. This is why self-command must remain quiet. Loud discipline attracts resistance. Quiet discipline becomes normal. In the next part, we'll close this chapter by exploring how self-command becomes identity, why you no longer need rules to behave, and how freedom begins to feel ordinary. Not exciting, but real. When control becomes who you are. At a certain point, self-command stops feeling like something you do. It becomes something you are. You no longer think in terms of rules. You don't need reminders. You don't negotiate with yourself the same way. Because order has settled. This is important to understand. When people imagine discipline, they imagine effort forever. But true discipline reduces effort over time. At first, structure feels restrictive. Later, it feels natural. Not because you lowered standards, but because your identity rose to meet them. You stop asking, "Should I do this?" Because the answer is already known. This is when self-command becomes quiet power. No inner shouting. No resistance. No forcing. You act because acting is normal now. You stop overthinking simple things. You don't dramatize effort. This doesn't make life perfect. It makes it stable. And stability is what allows growth to last. Here's something subtle that happens at this stage. You stop feeling watched by your own mind. You don't feel like you're being judged internally. The inner critic loses its job. Not because it was defeated, but because it's no longer needed. Self-command replaces criticism with clarity. Instead of, "Why did you mess up?" you hear, "Adjust." That single shift changes everything. You correct faster. You recover quicker. You move forward without weight. This is what freedom actually feels like. Not excitement. Not endless happiness. But reliability. You can rely on yourself. To show up. To pause. To choose. That reliability creates peace. Because you're no longer afraid of your own inconsistency. When life becomes difficult, and it will, you don't panic. You trust your structure. You don't need motivation. You don't need pressure. You move because movement is now part of who you are. This is why self-command must stay quiet. Loud discipline creates rebellion. Quiet discipline creates identity. And identity does not need enforcement. It acts automatically. This chapter matters because it marks a shift. You are no longer training the mind. You are living from it. In the next chapter, we'll look at what happens when this stability is challenged. When you slip. When you hesitate. When old patterns try to return. Not to shame you, but to show you how freedom survives imperfection. Self-command is strong, but life is unpredictable. What matters is not never slipping, but knowing how to return without losing yourself. Chapter 14. When you slip, and you will. The moment most people quit. There is a moment that ends most attempts at change. Not the beginning. Not the effort. The slip. You miss a day. You react instead of choosing. You fall back into an old habit. Nothing dramatic happens. No collapse. No explosion. Just a quiet return to what feels familiar. This is where most people decide something without saying it out loud. This is who I really am. And once that sentence settles, they stop trying. They tell themselves a story. I was doing well, but I lost it. I ruined the progress. That story is more damaging than the slip itself. Because the slip was temporary. The story makes it permanent. Here's the truth that changes everything. Slipping is not a sign that training failed. It's proof that you're human. The mind does not change in a straight line. It loops. It tests. It revisits old paths. That doesn't mean you're back at the beginning. Think of it this way. Before training, you didn't notice slipping. You lived there. Now you notice it. That awareness is progress. Most people measure growth incorrectly. They ask, "Did I mess up?" A better question is, "How quickly did I notice?" Speed of awareness matters more than perfection. Someone who notices slipping in minutes is not the same as someone who notices in months. Yet both might say, I failed. That word is doing too much damage. Failure implies an ending. Slipping is part of continuation. This chapter exists because slipping is inevitable. 3's what matters is not avoiding it, but surviving it without self-destruction. Most people don't fall back because of the slip. They fall back because of what they say to themselves afterward. They attack. You always do this. You never change. What's the point? Those sentences feel honest, but they're not true. They are reactions. And reactions don't deserve authority. When you slip, the mind wants explanation. Why did this happen? What's wrong with me? Those questions sound useful. They're not yet. Before explanation, you need stability. And stability comes from one thing: not making the slip mean more than it does. Here's what a slip actually is. A moment where an old pattern ran faster than awareness. That's it. No moral weight. No identity verdict. No prophecy. But most people turn a moment into a meaning. And meaning sticks. This is why the trained mind must respond differently after slipping. Not with punishment. Not with justification. With clarity. Clarity sounds like this: I drifted. That's information. I return. No emotion required. Notice how simple that is. And notice how difficult it feels at first. Because the ego wants drama. It wants either pride or shame. Clarity gives neither. Clarity keeps you moving. Drama stops you. Another dangerous response to slipping is comfort. Well, I already messed up. I'll start again tomorrow. That sentence has ended more progress than failure ever did. Because it delays return. And delay strengthens the old pattern. The rule that protects progress is simple. Return immediately. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. Return doesn't mean fixing everything. It means one correct action. Stand up. Breathe. Refocus. That's it. You don't need motivation to return. You need honesty. Honesty says, I slipped, and I'm still responsible. Responsibility without shame is freedom. This is where self-command proves itself. Not when things go well, but when they don't. Anyone can feel disciplined on good days. The trained mind shows itself on bad ones. If you can return after slipping, without attacking yourself, you have already won something important. You've broken the old cycle. The cycle of effort, slip, shame, quit. Most people never escape that loop. They live inside it for years. This chapter is about breaking that loop permanently. Not by avoiding slips, but by changing your response to them. In the next part, we'll talk about how to rebuild momentum after a slip while returning calmly retrains the mind faster, and how slips can actually strengthen self-command. If you let them. Returning without violence. The most important moment after a slip is not what you think. It's not the apology. It's not the analysis. It's not the promise to do better. It's the return. Most people return violently. They force themselves. They overcorrect. They punish. They wake up angry at themselves and try to dominate the mind back into order. That doesn't train the mind. It scares it. A frightened mind does not learn. It hides. It resists. It waits for the pressure to stop. Then it slips again. Training the mind requires firmness, without cruelty. Structure, without humiliation. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline means being harsh so the mind won't misbehave again. But harshness teaches the wrong lesson. It teaches the mind that mistakes are dangerous. And when mistakes feel dangerous, the mind becomes dishonest. It avoids awareness. It numbs. It distracts. That's how people lose control quietly. Not by failing, but by being afraid to notice. A trained mind is not afraid of awareness. It welcomes it. So what does a clean return look like? It looks small. You notice the slip. You stop what you're doing. You breathe. No lecture. No punishment. Then you ask one grounded question. What is the next correct action? Not the perfect one. Not the impressive one. The correct one. Maybe it's closing the app. Maybe it's standing up. Maybe it's writing one sentence. That single action is the return. The mind learns through repetition, not intensity. Every calm return rewires authority. Authority doesn't come from force. It comes from consistency. Each time you return without attacking yourself, the mind learns something new. I can drift and still come back. That sentence changes everything. It removes fear from awareness. Without fear, honesty grows. Without honesty, no training works. There is another mistake people make after slipping. They wait to feel ready again. That wait is dangerous. Read this carefully. Readiness follows action. It does not precede it. If you wait to feel focused before acting, you will wait indefinitely. The mind stabilizes after movement. This is why immediate return matters. Not emotionally, neurologically. Every minute you delay return, the old pattern strengthens its claim. Not because it's powerful, but because it's familiar. Familiarity feels like truth, even when it's not. Returning immediately weakens that illusion. It interrupts the loop. Over time, something important happens. The slips become shorter. Not fewer at first, shorter. You catch yourself faster. You return sooner. That is real progress. Many people quit at this stage because they expected perfection. They mistake shorter slips for failure. But shorter slips mean training is working. The mind is losing authority. Eventually, another shift occurs. The slip still happens, but it no longer carries momentum. It ends quickly. You don't spiral. You don't justify. You don't collapse. You simply notice and correct. That is self-command. Quiet, unemotional, effective. At this stage, the mind starts trusting you. Not because you're perfect, but because you're reliable. Reliability is more powerful than intensity. The mind relaxes when it knows you will return without violence. This is how inner order forms. Not through control, but through steady leadership. Leadership always looks calm. Even internally. One more truth needs to be said. You will slip again. Not because you're weak, but because you're alive. Training does not remove humanity. It organizes it. The goal was never to eliminate drifting. The goal was to eliminate being lost inside it. Now, when drifting begins, you are present. Presence is power. If you remember nothing else from this chapter, remember this. The return matters more than the slip. Return calmly. Return immediately. Return without shame. That is how the mind learns who is in charge. In the next chapter, we will talk about something even deeper. What happens when thoughts lose authority entirely, and choice becomes natural again? Chapter 15. Choosing who you serve. The quiet truth about control. Every human being serves something, even the ones who think they don't. You are always following a command. The only question is where it comes from. Some people serve their thoughts. Others train them. Most people never decide. They drift into obedience. If a thought says scroll, they scroll. If it says avoid, they avoid. If it says later, they wait. They don't feel controlled. They feel normal. That's the danger. The mind doesn't need chains to rule you. It only needs repetition. Over time, thoughts stop sounding like suggestions and start sounding like facts. This is just how I am. I can't focus. I'm not disciplined. I'll start tomorrow. These are not truths. They are habits. An untrained mind does not ask permission. It reacts. It pulls attention. It chases comfort. It avoids effort. And if you never interrupt it, it becomes the authority. That's what serving the mind looks like. Not suffering. Not drama. Automatic living. Training the mind does not make you rigid. It makes you available. Available to choose. Available to focus. Available to act on purpose. Freedom does not come from having no rules. It comes from having self-command. Most people wait for life to force change. Pain, loss, failure. But the strongest people don't wait. They decide early. They say, I will not live on autopilot. This book was never about controlling thoughts. It was about removing their authority. Thoughts are tools, not leaders. When you forget that, your life becomes reactive. When you remember it, your life becomes intentional. The cost of not choosing. There is a quiet cost to not training the mind. It doesn't arrive all at once. It shows up as years that blur together. Days that feel busy but empty. You don't feel trapped. You feel distracted. You don't feel miserable. You feel numb. This is how potential disappears. Not in failure, but in postponement. I'll do it later. I'll learn that someday. I'll change when life slows down. Life does not slow down. The mind loves delay. Delay protects comfort. But comfort unchallenged becomes decay. Not physically, mentally. An untrained mind avoids effort and calls it peace. It avoids focus and calls it flexibility. It avoids discipline and calls it freedom. That's the lie. True freedom feels different. It feels steady. It feels calm even during effort. It feels clean after action. Fake freedom feels loose, scattered, restless. Here is something most people realize too late. If you don't choose your thoughts, they choose your life. Not loudly. Quietly. One habit at a time. One distraction at a time. This is not meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you. Because awareness restores power immediately. What training actually looks like. Training the mind is not aggression. It is repetition. It is doing small, correct things consistently, even when the mind resists. Especially then. Training looks like noticing the urge, and not obeying it instantly. Training looks like pausing before reacting, breathing before responding. Training looks like choosing effort once per day, even when motivation is absent. The mind learns through pattern, not explanation. You don't argue with thoughts. You show them who leads. At first, resistance increases. That's normal. The mind resists loss of authority, like any system that's been in charge too long. But if you stay consistent, something changes. The noise softens. The urgency fades. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer command. This is where real peace comes from. Not silence, order. An ordered mind rests naturally. You stop fighting yourself. You stop negotiating. You act. Then you move on. Choosing who you serve daily. Every day, you will serve something. Impulse or intention. Distraction or direction. Reaction or choice. This choice is not dramatic. It is ordinary. It happens in small moments. When you wake up. When you pick up your phone. When you feel discomfort. Each moment asks a question. Who is in charge right now? If you don't answer, the mind answers for you. Serving the mind feels easy at first. Serving yourself feels harder. But over time, that reverses. A trained mind supports you. An untrained mind drains you. That's the difference. You don't need perfection. You need consistency. You don't need intensity. You need honesty. If you slip, you return. If you drift, you notice. That is command. The final truth. This book was not about thinking less. It was about thinking clearly. Not about control. About leadership. Not about silence. About choice. You will think for the rest of your life. The question is whether your thoughts will rule you or serve you. That decision is not philosophical. It's practical. Train the mind, and life opens. Serve it, and life narrows. No one else can make this choice for you. And no one else needs to. You already have what you need. Awareness. Consistency. Choice. Choose deliberately. And choose again tomorrow. That is freedom. Staying awake to your life. If you've listened this far, it means something in you was paying attention. Not because you were forced, but because a part of you wanted clarity. That part matters. Nothing in this audiobook was meant to overwhelm you. It was meant to remind you. You already have a mind capable of focus. You already have the ability to choose. You haven't been missing strength. You've just been distracted from it. Training the mind is not about changing who you are. It's about returning to yourself. The self that can pause. The self that can notice. The self that can decide. There will still be thoughts. There will still be noise. But now you know something important. You don't have to obey everything you think. Some days will feel steady. Other days will feel scattered. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're human. When you drift, notice it. When you react, pause next time. When you forget, return. That is the practice. You don't need to do everything at once. Just one deliberate choice today. One moment where you lead instead of follow. One action that feels intentional. That is how self-command is built. Quietly, daily. If this audiobook helped you, let it stay with you, not as information, but as awareness. And if you feel called to, share it with someone who feels pulled by their own mind. Sometimes people don't need motivation. They need permission to slow down and choose. Thank you for being present here. Thank you for listening with intention. Your life is shaped by what you attend to. Choose carefully. And when the mind gets loud again, you'll know what to do. If this message spoke to you, share it. Subscribe. Keep listening. This is Beyond the Noise Studio.